Welcome, listeners, to a story that promises to keep you on the edge of your seat. A tale woven from the threads of fear, mystery, and the unknown. Tonight, we take you to a place called the Whispering Woods, a place where shadows hold secrets and the night speaks in hushed tones. Stay with us as we unravel this chilling tale. If you dare. It began with an invitation, a small, innocuous-looking envelope, with a wax seal marked with an unfamiliar symbol, 3 interwoven triangles that seemed to pulse slightly under the light. Daniel, Lena, and Marcus, 3 friends with an unquenchable thirst for adventure and the unexplained, found these letters slipped under their doors one evening. They weren't the type to scare easily. Daniel, the practical one, brushed it off as a prank. "Someone's playing games," he muttered, tossing the letter on his cluttered desk. Lena, the curious one, read it over several times, her brow furrowing with interest. "Come on, guys," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "This could be fun. Who wouldn't want to unravel a good mystery?" Marcus, however, was different. He had heard stories about the Whispering Woods, stories that made his skin crawl and his heart race. The woods weren't far from their small town, nestled just beyond the rolling hills that marked the town's boundaries. It was a place where people went in but rarely came out unchanged. But despite his reservations, Marcus's curiosity got the better of him. After all, the letter was personal, written as if it knew them, calling them by name. "You have been chosen to find the truth," it read. "Enter the Whispering Woods if you're brave enough." With Lena's persuasion and Daniel's goading, Marcus reluctantly agreed. They set off on a cold October evening, the chill in the air biting at their cheeks as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town. The path leading into the woods was overgrown, almost hidden from view. It looked as if it hadn't been used in years. As they stepped onto the trail, a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring their vision and muting the sounds of the forest. The only noise was the crunching of leaves beneath their feet and the distant hoot of an owl. "What are we even looking for?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking the eerie silence. "I don't know," Lena replied, her voice soft. "But we'll know it when we see it." Marcus remained quiet, his eyes darting around, watching for any movement. The fog was getting thicker, almost unnaturally so, and the air seemed to grow colder with each step. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere changed. The forest seemed to close in on them. The trees gnarled and twisted like ancient sentinels watching their every move. And then they heard the whispering. It was faint at first, just a whistle, like leaves blowing in the wind, but there was no wind. It grew louder, more distinct, a chorus of hushed voices chanting in a language they couldn't understand. "What the hell is that?" Daniel muttered, his bravado fading. Lena shook her head, trying to focus. Maybe it's just the wind," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. Marcus, however, knew better. The stories his grandfather had told him about the woods were flooding back, stories of people who ventured in and were never the same. Stories of rituals and sacrifices to ancient, dark forces. "Maybe we should go back," Marcus suggested, his voice barely a whisper. But before they could decide, they saw it a faint glow ahead, flickering like a candle in the darkness. "We need to see what it is," Lena insisted, her eyes fixed on the light. Against his better judgment, Marcus followed. The whispering grew louder, the glow brighter, pulling them deeper into the heart of the Whispering Woods. The forest seemed alive. The whispering was all around them now, a constant, unnerving presence. As they moved closer to the light, the trees seemed to shift, their twisted forms bending towards them, as if watching, waiting. They reached a small clearing, where the light was coming from. It was a lantern hanging from the branch of an ancient gnarled tree. Below it, a circle of stones was arranged on the ground, each one covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. Lena knelt down to examine the stones. "What do you think these are?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shrugged. "Looks like some kind of ritual site," he said, though there was a nervous edge to his voice. Marcus's eyes were fixed on the lantern, swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. "I don't like this," he muttered. "We should go now." But before they could move, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The symbols on the stones glowed brighter, casting long shadows across the clearing. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, like a chant reaching its crescendo. "What's happening?" Lena cried, stumbling back. Daniel tried to grab her, but the ground shifted violently, knocking them both to the ground. Marcus watched in horror as the tree above them began to change. Its bark split open, revealing a dark, gaping maw, its edges lined with sharp, jagged branches that twisted and writhed like snakes. A voice, deep and resonant, boomed from the darkness within the tree. "You have been chosen," it said, its tone cold and commanding. Before they could react, the roots of the tree shot out, wrapping around their legs and pulling them towards the maw. Daniel struggled, panic setting in. "What the hell is this? Let us go!" He screamed, but the roots only tightened, pulling them closer to the tree. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and suddenly, the tree's maw opened wider, swallowing them whole. Darkness enveloped them, cold and suffocating. They tumbled through the void, disoriented and terrified, until they landed with a hard thud on a stone floor. Marcus groaned, his body aching from the fall. He blinked, trying to adjust to the dim light. They were in a vast, cavernous chamber, the walls covered in strange, pulsating symbols similar to those on the stones in the clearing. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Lena sat up, her eyes wide with fear. Where are we?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the chamber. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice strained. "There has to be a way out." But before they could move, the shadows around them began to shift. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms indistinct and ghostly, like wisps of smoke. They surrounded them, whispering in that same strange language. One figure stepped forward, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. It raised a hand, and the whisper stopped abruptly. "Welcome," it said, its voice echoing through the chamber. "You have come seeking the truth, and now you shall have it." The figure raised its hand, and the symbols on the walls flared with light. Images flashed before their eyes, visions of the wood's dark past. They saw a group of people in long, dark robes, chanting around a fire. They saw the tree from the clearing, younger but still twisted and gnarled, its roots stained with blood. The figure spoke again, its voice filled with a cold, detached malice. "The Whispering Woods is a gateway, a bridge between worlds. It feeds on the souls of those who enter, using their fear to fuel its power." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the visions continued, showing scenes of sacrifice and ritual, of people dragged screaming into the darkness. "Why us?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why were we chosen?" The figure turned its hooded head towards him, and though he couldn't see its eyes, he felt its gaze pierce through him. "You were chosen because you were curious," it said, "because you sought the truth, no matter the cost." The shadows around them began to close in, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. Lena grabbed Marcus's arm, her grip tight. "We need to get out of here now," she whispered, panic in her voice. Daniel nodded, looking around frantically for a way out. He spotted a faint outline of a door on the far side of the chamber. "There," he shouted, pointing. Without thinking, they ran for the door, the shadows reaching out to grab them as they passed. Marcus could feel the cold tendrils of darkness clawing at his skin, pulling him back, but he pushed forward, desperate to escape. They reached the door and burst through it, slamming it shut behind them. The whispers stopped abruptly, and they found themselves in a narrow tunnel, the air cold and damp. Lena leaned against the wall, her chest heaving with exertion. What was that?" she gasped, her voice trembling. Daniel shook his head, trying to catch his breath. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving. There's no telling what else is in here." Marcus nodded, glancing back at the door. He could still hear the faint whispering on the other side, growing louder with each passing second. "We have to find a way out of these woods," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Before it's too late." The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning like a labyrinth. The walls were covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a faint light, casting eerie shadows that danced along the floor. The air was cold and heavy, filled with a faint, metallic smell that made their skin crawl. Lena led the way, her flashlight flickering in the darkness. Daniel followed close behind, his eyes darting around nervously. Marcus brought up the rear, his mind racing with questions. Who were those figures in the chamber? What was this place? And how are they going to get out? The tunnel seemed to go on for miles, twisting and turning in every direction. At times it would narrow so much that they had to squeeze through, their backs scraping against the cold, damp stone. Other times it would open up into wide chambers, filled with strange, pulsating crystals that glowed with a sickly green light. They came across a large cavern filled with what looked like ancient carvings. The walls depicted scenes of rituals and sacrifices, of figures kneeling before a great tree, its roots twisted and gnarled. At the center of the cavern was a massive stone altar stained with what looked like centuries of blood. Lena shuddered, turning away from the sight. "This place is cursed," she muttered. "We need to get out of here fast." Marcus nodded, glancing around the chamber. "But how? There doesn't seem to be any way out." Daniel pointed to a narrow passageway on the far side of the cavern. "There," he said. "That might lead us out." They made their way across the cavern, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As they approached the passageway, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The symbols on the walls flared with light, and the shadows around them began to shift. "What now?" Lena groaned, her voice tinged with frustration. The ground shook violently, knocking them to the floor. The shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting like snakes. They rose up from the ground, forming into dark, indistinct figures that moved towards them, their whispers growing louder and more frenzied. Daniel scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with fear. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Lena's arm and pulling her towards the passageway. Marcus followed close behind, his heart racing as the shadows closed in around them. He could feel the cold tendrils of darkness clawing at his skin, pulling him back, but he pushed forward, desperate to escape. They reached the passageway and ran through it, the shadows close behind. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls closing in around them as they ran. The whispers grew louder, more frenzied, echoing off the stone walls like a chorus of voices. They ran until their legs burned and their lungs screamed for air. Finally, the tunnel opened up into a wide cavern filled with strange glowing crystals. The light was blinding, forcing them to shield their eyes. "What is this place?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shook his head, his eyes wide with awe. "I don't know, but it's beautiful," he said, his voice tinged with wonder. Marcus, however, was more focused on the shadows. They had stopped at the entrance to the cavern, their dark forms writhing and twisting like smoke. They seemed unable to enter, held back by an invisible force. Lena noticed them too, her eyes narrowing. "Why aren't they following us?" she asked. Marcus shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe they can't. Maybe this place is protected." Daniel nodded, glancing around the cavern. "Whatever it is, we need to figure out how to get out of here. We can't stay in this place forever." As they explored the cavern, they noticed that the crystals seemed to hum with energy, their light pulsing in time with a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the chamber. It was both soothing and unsettling, like a lullaby sung in a nightmare. Lena approached one of the larger crystals, reaching out to touch it. As her fingers brushed the surface, the light flared, and she jerked her hand back, yelping in surprise. "It's warm," she exclaimed, rubbing her hand. Marcus frowned, examining the crystals more closely. "They're not just rocks," he said, his voice low. "They're alive, or something like it." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the cavern. "There's something about this place," he said. "I feel like we're not alone." Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and commanding. "You are not alone." They spun around, searching for the source of the voice. At the center of the cavern, a figure began to materialize, formed from the light of the crystals. It was tall and thin, its form shifting and flickering like a flame. "I am the guardian," the figure said, its voice resonating through the chamber. "I am the keeper of the WhisperingWoods, the protector of the gateway." Lena stepped forward, her voice trembling. "What do you want with us?" she asked. The guardian's form flickered, its eyes glowing with a cold green light. "You have been chosen," it said. "Chosen to witness the truth of the woods, to understand its power." Daniel clenched his fists, his voice rising in anger. "We don't want to witness anything," he shouted. "We just want to get out of here." The guardian's eyes narrowed, its form shifting with a sudden, violent energy. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice harsh. "The woods have chosen you. You belong to it now." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the guardian's words sank in. "There has to be a way out," he said, his voice firm. "We didn't come here to be prisoners." The guardian's form flickered again, its eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "There is no escape," it said. "The woods are alive, and it feeds on those who enter. You cannot leave until it is done with you." Lena stepped forward, her eyes blazing with anger. "We're not just going to sit here and wait to be devoured," she said. "There has to be another way." The guardian's form shifted, its eyes narrowing, There is one way, it said, its voice low, but it is dangerous, and few have ever succeeded. Daniel's eyes widened, his voice filled with desperation. What is it? He asked. What do we have to do? The Guardian's eyes glowed brighter, its form shimmering with a strange energy. You must face the darkness within the woods, it said. You must confront the evil that lies at its heart. Only then will you be free. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as the Guardian's words sank in. What is the evil? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Guardian's eyes flared, its form growing larger, more imposing. It is an ancient force, it said, a creature born from the darkness, feeding on the souls of those who enter the woods. It is the true heart of the Whispering Woods, and it cannot be destroyed, but it can be contained. Lena's eyes narrowed, her voice filled with determination. How do we contain it? She asked. The Guardian's form flickered, its eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. You must find the 3 relics, it said, objects of power hidden deep within the woods. Only when all 3 are brought together can the creature be contained. Daniel nodded, his voice steady. Where do we find these relics? The Guardian's eyes glowed brighter, its form shifting with a strange energy. They are hidden in the darkest parts of the woods, it said, guarded by creatures of darkness. You must find them, or you will never leave this place. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the Guardian's words sank in. We have to try, he said, his voice firm. It's our only chance. Lena nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. Then let's go, she said. We don't have any time to waste. The Guardian's form flickered, its eyes glowing with a strange light. Be careful, it said. The woods are treacherous, and the darkness is always watching. Trust in each other, and you may yet survive. With that, the Guardian's form began to fade, its light dimming until it was nothing more than a faint glow. The chamber fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the crystals. Daniel turned to the others, his eyes filled with determination. Let's find those relics, he said, and get the hell out of here. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had no choice but to press on. The Guardian's words echoed in their minds, filling them with a sense of purpose. They had to find the relics and contain the evil that lay at the heart of the Whispering Woods. They made their way through the cavern, following the faint glow of the crystals. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified by the silence. But they moved with determination, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. The first relic, according to the Guardian, was hidden in the Cave of Shadows, a place where the darkness was alive, twisting and shifting like a living thing. It was said to be guarded by a creature known as the Shadow Beast, a being of pure darkness that fed on fear. As they approached the cave, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift, as if reaching out to grab them. The entrance was a dark, gaping maw, the stone walls covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. Lena took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the entrance. This is it, she said, her voice steady. We have to go in. Marcus nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Stay close, he said, and don't let the shadows touch you. They entered the cave, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was cold and heavy, filled with a faint metallic smell that made their skin crawl. The walls seemed to close in around them, the shadows shifting and twisting like smoke. As they moved deeper into the cave, the darkness grew thicker, almost suffocating. They could barely see a few feet ahead, their flashlights flickering in the gloom. And then, they heard a low, guttural growl, echoing through the darkness. Daniel froze, his eyes wide with fear. What was that? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Lena shook her head, her eyes scanning the darkness. I don't know, she said, but whatever it is, it's close. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness, staring at them with a fierce, predatory gaze. The glowing grew louder, and a massive shape began to emerge from the shadows. It was the shadow beast, a creature of pure darkness, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. It was huge, its body covered in dark, matted fur, its eyes glowing with a fierce red light. The beast lunged at them, its jaws snapping. They scrambled out of the way, barely avoiding its razor-sharp teeth. The shadows seemed to come alive, wrapping around their legs, pulling them towards the beast. Lena grabbed a rock, hurling it at the beast. It struck its side, and the creature let out a roar of anger, turning its attention towards her. She backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. Marcus spotted a small alcove on the far side of the cave, the faint glow of something shining from within. The relic, he shouted, pointing. It's over there. Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the beast. I'll distract it, he said. You two go get the relic. He picked up a rock, hurling it at the beast. It struck its head, and the creature turned towards him, its eyes blazing with fury. He backed away, leading it away from the alcove. Lena and Marcus sprinted towards the alcove, dodging the shadows that seemed to reach out to grab them. They reached the alcove, and Lena grabbed the relic, a small, glowing stone, covered in strange symbols. As soon as she touched it, the cave was filled with a blinding light. The shadows shrieked, retreating into the darkness. The beast let out a roar of pain, its form dissolving into smoke. The light faded, and the cave fell silent. The air was still, the only sound their heavy breathing. Daniel approached them, his eyes wide with awe. You did it, he said, his voice filled with relief. You got the relic. Lena nodded, holding the stone up. One down, she said. 2 to go. With the first relic in hand, they set off for the second, a golden amulet hidden in the heart of the woods, a place said to be the source of the wood's power. The path was treacherous, filled with traps and obstacles, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that their only chance of escape lay in finding the relics. As they approached the heart of the woods, the air grew thick with a strange, heavy energy. The trees around them seemed to pulse with life, their branches twisting and writhing like serpents. The ground was covered in strange, glowing moss that seemed to shift and change underfoot. The amulet was said to be guarded by a creature known as the Wood Wraith, a being of pure energy, its form ever-changing, its power unmatched. As they entered the clearing, they saw a figure of light and shadow, its form shifting and twisting like a flame. The wraith let out a low, guttural growl, its eyes glowing with a fierce green light. It raised a hand, and the ground beneath them began to tremble, the trees around them bending and twisting like living things. Lena stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. We're not afraid of you, she said, her voice firm. We've come for the amulet, and we're not leaving without it. The wraith let out a roar of anger, its form shifting with a sudden, violent energy. It lunged at them, its hands crackling with electricity. They dodged out of the way, the air around them sizzling with energy. Daniel grabbed a branch, swinging it at the wraith. It passed right through it, the wood disintegrating into ash. "It's no use," he shouted. "We can't fight it." Marcus's eyes darted around the clearing, looking for the amulet. He spotted it, hanging from a branch high above them, its golden surface gleaming in the light. "There," he shouted, pointing. "The amulet!" Lena nodded, her eyes fixed on the wraith. "All distracted," she said. "You two go get the amulet." She picked up a rock, hurling it at the wraith. It struck its side, and the creature turned towards her, its eyes blazing with fury. She backed away, leading it away from the branch. Marcus and Daniel scrambled up the tree, reaching for the amulet. As soon as Marcus touched it, the wraith let out a scream of rage, its form dissolving into smoke. The ground trembled, and the trees around them began to collapse, their branches shattering like glass. They grabbed the amulet, jumping down from the tree just as the clearing exploded in a burst of light. The air was filled with a deafening roar, the ground shaking beneath their feet. But when the light faded, they were still standing, the amulet clutched in Marcus's hand. Narrator, inspirational. With the second relic in hand, they made their way to the final destination, the heart of the Whispering Woods, where the creature of darkness lay in wait. The air was thick with tension, every step a reminder of the danger that lay ahead. They reached the heart of the woods, a massive, twisted tree, its roots spreading out like dark tendrils, its branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. At its base lay a small stone pedestal, covered in strange, glowing symbols. The third relic was a silver dagger, said to be the only weapon capable of wounding the creature of darkness. It lay on the pedestal, its blade gleaming in the dim light. As they approached the tree, the ground began to tremble, the air growing cold and heavy. The shadows around them began to shift and twist, forming into dark, indistinct shapes that moved towards them. The creature of darkness emerged from the shadows, a massive, hulking figure, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. Its eyes glowed with a fierce red light, its mouth a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. Lena grabbed the dagger, holding it up. "This ends now," she said, her voice steady. The creature let out a roar of anger, lunging at them. They scattered, dodging its massive claws. Lena slashed at it with the dagger, the blade cutting through its dark form like butter. The creature let out a scream of pain, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Marcus and Daniel grabbed the relics, holding them up. The symbols on the tree began to glow, the air filled with a strange humming sound. The ground trembled, the shadows retreating into the darkness. The creature let out a final, blood-curdling scream, its form dissolving into smoke. The light around them flared, and the ground beneath them began to shake. The tree let out a low, groaning sound, its roots retracting into the earth. The air was filled with a blinding light, and when it faded, they were standing in a clearing, the tree gone, the shadows nowhere to be seen. They collapsed to the ground, their chests heaving with exhaustion. But they were alive, and the woods were silent. Lena looked around, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We contained it." Marcus nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're free," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We can go home." Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with tears. "We made it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We actually made it." They stood up, their eyes scanning the clearing. The air was still, the woods quiet. But for the first time, they felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure. They had faced the darkness, and they had won. As they made their way out of the woods, the sun began to rise, casting a warm golden light over the trees. The air was fresh and clean, filled with the sounds of birds singing. For the first time in what felt like forever, they felt alive. They had faced their fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged victorious. The woods would never be the same, but neither would they. They had found strength in each other and in themselves, and as they stepped out into the light, they knew they would never forget the Whispering Woods or the lessons they had learned. For they had seen the darkness, and they had overcome it, and that, they knew, was the greatest victory of all.